Now, some gender experts say that there are massive income inequalities despite strides made in achieving gender parity in South Africa's 30 years of democracy. President Cyril Ramaphosa also used his Women's Day speech to highlight South Africa's alarming levels of gender-based violence. But despite the many gains, that women are still in the shadows of the shackles of patriarchy. To help unpack this, we're joined by Hilary Leon, who's the CEO of ACT Africa. Hilary, thank you so much for joining us this Saturday evening. I guess the question of are women still in the shackles and shadows of patriarchy is a bit of a rhetorical question, isn't it?
Yes, good evening, Marcia, and good evening to all the viewers. Thank you for having ACT Africa on your program. So yes, most definitely, and especially in this day and age, where it is still a struggle for us women where it's supposed to be something that is if I can use the word, almost smooth sailing. Okay, nothing is smooth sailing when in terms of, especially in your corporate spheres and that kind of thing, or even in the business sphere, entrepreneurial sphere, for women, it's still a harder stride for a woman to get to where she wants to be or to that level where, whereas that male counterpart, it's still easier. And we often find ourselves, when you're struggling to get to a particular point or to seal a particular deal within that business sphere, and often you find yourself saying, you know what, maybe let a man go because this seems to be quite male orientated, and let him go and then seal that deal, which for me in this day and age shouldn't even be something, a discussion or a question or an option. You should be, as a female, be able to go in there knowing and not saying, you know, is it a male thing? Is it a female thing? Let's gauge the situation and see what fits in order to get ahead of whatever it is you want to get ahead into within the corporate, within the business space. But yet we find ourselves doing those kind of things. And that is evident of the inequality that is taking place because you won't be listened to, or you think, or it comes across that way that you won't be listened to or heard as you should be.
Yeah, and speaking of environments like that, particularly in the business sector where women are not as heard as men are and struggle to be heard as well, who's responsible for cultivating that environment as well? Is it not the corporates themselves as well? And who runs these corporates? It's human beings as well. So what should be done that isn't being done, that's not cultivating this environment where it's creating equality for men and women in the workplace, whether it's being heard or when it comes to the pay gap as well?
Well, I think for what I can see in the corporate space, because people are holding on to a lot of the old norms and the old traditions in fear of losing maybe a bit of power or losing a status, especially from a male perspective, and then it boils down to the individual, their mindset, their thought pattern with regards to male and female, what a male, what a male's role is, what a female's role is in that corporate sphere, and that is where it boils down to. So whoever is in charge, or the boards, the people, or the CEO or the owner of that company, they set the tone. They set the tone for the rest of the company. So yes, I definitely believe from higher up already, if that tone is already set, that you know, where inequality exists, it's going to filter down. If there's a tone that is set where there is equalness, you know, equality between the male and female, that you don't have that discomfort or unease as a female, that I can come up with an idea, I can go there to, you know, I can sit on level plane with my male counterpart, then we have a problem. And again, it goes to not just a matter of pen and paper, it comes from a human being and it comes from mindset. And that is the problem. And people holding on to what they think they're going to lose if they do allow equality, more of an equal plane in that corporate sphere, business sphere to take place. And I think that is what a lot of it, the mindset and the fear of losing your sense of position or power.
It seems also when we are looking at the month of August, you know, every year it does seem that not only is government saying the right things, but also corporates are also saying the right things as well. And in a way, there is a needle that is being shifted quite a little bit when it comes to the public sector and the private sector, but it's not shifting quick enough, clearly. Who's responsible for making sure that it does actually happen? Because government does have certain legislation that does ensure that women obviously are treated equally, but that doesn't always, that's not the case, as we know.
Implementation. So those laws are there, but you know, in your corporate way, like again, we go back to whatever the culture is that is set in that business sphere, that law has to be abided to, right? And they know it. But then you have the part, you as let's say a female, um, experience and a situation of inequality, knowing you have the law on your side. But there is also that fear. If I do apply the law and go a step further to CCMA, to Department of Labor, or wherever it is, to say, you know what, I'm being unfairly treated. It is unequal. Yes, yes, yes. Inequality existing. This is the experience. Then there's the fear of I could lose my job because I have spoken out. So those are factors that definitely play a huge role in the situation, not getting to where it should be as fast as we want it to.
Yesterday, as the president was giving his address in the Northern Cape on Women's Day, he said that more economic opportunities for women need to be there so they are less vulnerable to exploitation and abuse. And that brings us to South Africa's alarming gender-based violence statistics as well. Do you find that, Hilary, there's been a lot of talking the talk but not walking the walk?
Yes. There's a lot of going on. So that is why I always say, you know, when there's conferences held and all of these things, it's all good and well. We're saying it. And again, but are we doing something tangible? So when I speak of tangibility, you know, putting something in place that is going to change the system. We've got perfect laws. Yes, it does come down to the individual that you have to take responsibility and accountability for your action, and the law is there. From the law side, when gender-based violence victims go into police station, that is when the enforcement of those laws, the implementation has to take place. You also have the side from the victim side, where they are scared because they feel if I do this, nothing happens. It's not going to go any further. Or perhaps, depending on how influential the person is, there could be a situation of corruption. Now, going back to what you're saying in terms of tangibility, that is where your civil society organizations, a lot of us have come to, are really being out there, advocating, doing what we can, and creating tangible solutions. We on Thursday, ACT Africa actually spent 4 years developing a board game called No to Violence, Monster Mayhem Defeating Gender-Based Violence, which is a tangible aspect that's going to be filtered into the schools to children ages 10 to 18 plus. So the schools and even adults can play this game. But it's a game that works. It's not there to point out who's a perpetrator and a victim. It's there to change mindsets. It's there to any negative norms and belief systems that attribute, that cause, that fuels somebody's action negatively towards gender-based violence. It's there to create that seed and to change that, assist with changing that negative mindset and that dysfunction. So that is a tangibility because we do believe that it is a mindset change. No matter what law you have in the country, if somebody's mindset is totally negative and warped, they're going to do what they want to do irrespective. The law, it's like a murderer or a rapist. They know it is wrong. They know the law is against them, yet they still do it. That a perpetrator of abuse in terms of GBV, domestic violence, even human trafficking, you know, they know these things are wrong, but because they're so driven by that mindset, the whatever it is, that driving force, which is totally negative, they do it irrespective. And that is where I say the tangibility comes in with regards to implementing a measure that is going to be preventative and break the cycles of gender-based violence. And again, I come back to this board game, No to Violence, which starts at grassroots levels. And through all the play testing that we've done over the years, we've actually seen results where kids have come into play test and they absolutely, the kids come in disruptive, etc. And within 10 minutes of playing the game, there's like a 180-degree change in their whole attitude, that in the end, they actually don't want to stop playing the game and call their peers to play the game as well. And that's what we've encountered. So it's things like that that we need to implement physically and tangibly, that whilst having, like in our case, whilst having fun, the kids are having fun, so they're learning, and at the same time, it's assisting with changing a mindset and a dysfunction. So we need to look at ways that are out of the box almost. You look at different initiatives that's going to create that mindset for that perpetrator as well as even the victim to get out of that abusive situation and give them that confidence that, you know what, I don't need to put up with this. I don't have to. And there is help out there and I should utilize it. And I shouldn't be scared. I should take that step forward.
Yeah, and I like, Hilary, that you're mentioning it from an early childhood development point as well, because as you're saying, it's a mindset that needs to be shifted. And what better place to start than at the formative years as well. And it
100%.
seems that for the longest time, there was this focus on the girl child when it came to gender-based violence. For the long time, there was a focus on the woman to say, watch what you're wearing, watch what you're drinking, watch the places that you go to, look out for your own safety. But then also we know that a lot of the time the GBV cases, it's a perpetrator that you may know that may also be in your home as well. And as a result of this too, this is also economic abuse, which is what the president was mentioning too. So women are almost caught at the back foot, whether you are being disadvantaged in a corporate sector where you're being paid less because of the gender pay gap, or also when you get back home as well, and then you have to fight as well for your life there. Because if we're looking at the rates of violence against women and children in this country, they're the highest, among the highest in the world.
Yeah, it is absolutely, when you look at we say size, but I firmly believe the world is not far off from where South Africa is, if in some cases could even exceed. And the reason why I say this, ACT Africa does work not just in South Africa, but across the continent. And, people in the US, one of our ambassadors lives in Miami, etc. And we listen to, and I've got family and friends in different parts of the world. And when I listen to them and they speak about statistics around the world, I do realize that governments out there tend to withhold information on gender-based violence and on the violence in their countries, yet they're pointing a finger at South Africa like we are just the ultimate worst. Not saying, taking away from the fact that our situation is bad, that our situation is, but in terms of laws that are there against gender-based violence, against, South Africa does stand out. Again, implementation, that's what's needed. So basically, South Africans are outspoken, a lot of people. So our skeletons are there. We learn everything, we speak out. Our history, coming from the apartheid era, it's like, no, this is wrong, we're speaking out. You have countries there where it's not like that. We think it's like that, so free, but it isn't. So when we compare that, they know the rest of the world is not far off, but yes, we are, ours is all over the show and it is there for everybody to see, which is, whether it's a good thing or not a good thing, it's debatable.
Yeah.
But the essence is it needs to be curbed, it needs to be stopped, and at grassroots level, because our children are dysfunctional, and we cannot have a next generation of adults in your economic sphere that are dysfunctional, because it does impact economically, which means it's a further downturn of economics, because no person can function optimally if you are not functional in a positive way. And I talk not just from a physical aspect, but from a mental aspect, from an emotional aspect. So you need to be, functional positively to be effective in your business, to be effective in your job, which definitely does affect your profits in your company, in your country, and so on and so on. And that is where, again, we're back to our board game. It addresses those kind of things without being invasive. It is really a board game that while you're playing it, it plants seeds. If I can just give one example, one of our board game instructors had such a issue with road rage. After playing the board game a few times, he now on his own, and I physically witnessed it, and I saw where he curbed himself and said to himself, through this board game, something like road rage has diminished because his mindset has changed in terms of how he approaches and acts towards somebody that would obviously spark off road rage. He has realized I don't have to be sparked off and allow somebody else's negative reaction to spark me off in a negative way. I have a choice on how to respond. And now, knowing what this board game advocates against, no to violence, gender-based violence, whatever it is, it's planted that seed and it has worked on his mindset that he now has done a 180 degree. And I was quite stunned, and I said, that for me tells me how that this game, how impactful it is, and already we've seen it with the children. So yeah, these are the kind of things that we need to do in the corporate space for team building, for in your homes with families, as opposed to, and especially where people don't like to go for counseling.
That is
People
another source
feel it's
on.
invasive. Yeah, it's invasive. So we thought
Hillary,
of
I'd
this.
like to
It's
keep you
not,
on the line so we can continue this conversation. That's very
yes,
important to continue this conversation. If you have an extra 5 or so minutes for us, we're just going to take a quick
yes, I
ad
do.
break, and then we'll
Sure.
continue this conversation with Hillary Leon, who is the CEO of ACT Africa. We'll be back. We are still in conversation with the CEO of ACT Africa, Hillary Leon, just talking about the plight of women being in the shackles and shadows of patriarchy still in 2024. Now, Hillary, before the break, we were talking about, just shifting mindsets and the board game that ACT Africa has come up with, and how that also helps to mitigate certain bad behaviors too. Let's talk about other low-hanging fruit that we could possibly go for as a society. Earlier, we were speaking about just generally the lack of accountability, the lack of implementation of laws as well. When we're looking, for instance, at those stats that have come out of the Eastern Cape recently that show the number of children aged between 10 and 14, comprising of the pregnancy stats as well. These are statutory rapes, and there are about 94 of those young girls as well. Surely, in those cases, the authorities, specifically law enforcement authorities, should be already at those homes of those young children to find out who raped these young children, and the law then should take its course, because from where we're sitting, it seems as if the stats were presented. There's been some counseling for the families and for the children, but the people who are the perpetrators of having sexual relations with children aged between 10 and 14, which means that there's a statutory rape, just get away scot-free.
100%. That is a problem, not just now, because if you remember, was it last year, even the year before, when the pregnancy stats came out, and it showed how high that pregnancy rate was within children, because you were a child up to the age 18, up to age according to the law. And that, like you say, definitely it spells rape. It equals rape. It doesn't even spell it. It is rape. who has done it. And you find that often in communities, especially in your Eastern Cape, there's a lot of rural, because you find a lot of that has happened there. And there's the Ukutwala system where kids are even married off to older men or promised to older men, sleep with the older men for the sake of money. And the families perceive it as that child is assisting with the upkeep of the family, putting bread on the table and things like that. So there's those forms of things. So there's a myriad of things. It's not just that somebody has decided have a relationship with this child and sleep. So there's a string of things that needs to be looked at, that child could have been sold to somebody in order to an older man or an older woman, because boys too, it's not just women, it's boys that are affected too. Um, in these situations. But yes, we know the bulk of it is the girl child that is being exploited and suffering at those hands of those kind of situations where marriages are forced marriages are taking place. But ultimately, irrespective of whatever that relationship is, law enforcement has to look deeper into the case and not say this child is 4 years, so much pregnancy. Government now has to see if they know exactly who gave birth, because they have the stats. From there, that baby, that child, the DNA can lead to who the father is, or the person who impregnated that child. And from there, the investigation can go further and further into really then the apprehension of the perpetrators. And I actually feel charges immediately of rape should be opened in all those 94 cases of those underage children, especially where they find that there's an older person involved.
And that should be fairly easier to track as well. But also going back to the president's speech yesterday, I think the president does a very good job at diagnosing the problem as well. Yesterday, he mentioned that black and colored women still remain disempowered in the face of poverty, and this is one of the legacies of apartheid. We have had affirmative action for 3 decades now. Is it ineffective or not being implemented correctly?
Yes, I agree with him that there are disadvantages right up until this point. And when it comes to BEE, BEE either works or it doesn't work. And it depends on, again, implementation. So you have that particular person, people can manipulate that whole BEE cycle for their own benefit. For example, I'm going to give you an example going years back when I was in the corporate space. We encountered something when BEE came in, and you had to employ people according to race and color and things like that. But you knew people in the offices, in your bosses wanted a particular color. So they would tell you, they would deliberately employ somebody who is black or colored that is not suited for the job, knowing that they are set up for failure, set up to get to a point a few months' time where they'll either leave or be fired from their job because they're not capable. So there's a deliberate, so that is how it was manipulated. Where BEE today, in some ways, it looks like it doesn't work. It was a lot of times it was manipulated in the corporate space, and people were hired deliberately who couldn't do the job. And when they were found they couldn't do the job, then the next counterpart would come in, which wouldn't be black or white, and say, right, they'll come in and they'll do the job. So you have that, again, that imbalance. So that is something I personally picked up on in the corporate space. I personally picked up on that, and I was like, obviously kicked up a racket against it in the particular companies that I was, and said, but this is a deliberate manipulation of countering what BEE is supposed to be doing, and that is balancing the scales. We deliberately hiring people that aren't fit for the job. How can we do something like that? You're setting up a person for failure, and then you say BEE doesn't work. So that is part of the problem as we sit today. So irrespective of that, we have BEE. You need to take a person in. If you need a particular color group, and depending on what your your ratios need to look like, and within your company, make sure that that person is suitable. If there isn't, go to the next one, but don't deliberately then mess up the BEE process to make it look like BEE doesn't work. It can work if it is done properly. But yes, hire people who are suited for the job and do not be. And right now, there's a total imbalance because you also a total imbalance in terms of that. And that's why BEE hasn't worked as it should have worked, because of the manipulation that has gone on with BEE.
Hilary, thank you so much for your insights and all the work that you do at ACT Africa, especially that board game that aims to tackle gender-based violence.